What would you do if the only thing left in your name was 280 acres of collapsed ridgeland that hadn't produced a single dollar in 40 years? That's exactly what Cora Bellamy was staring at when the estate attorney slid the deed across his desk. And every person she trusted was already telling her to walk away. The office of Dwight Harlan, estate attorney for the better part of 3 decades, smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. Cora Bellamy, 36, sat in a wooden chair that creaked every time she shifted her weight, which she did often, because the man sitting across from her was making her deeply uncomfortable. That man was her older brother, Neil. Neil Bellamy, 43, was a real estate developer out of Pittsburgh, the kind who wore fleece vests over collared shirts and drove a truck that had never once been off-road. He sat now with his elbows on his knees, jaw tight, staring at the deed like it had personally wronged him. "Read it again, Dwight," he said. Dwight Harlan cleared his throat. He had the patient expression of a man who had watched too many families fall apart over paperwork. The bank accounts, the remaining pension balance of $18,000, and the 2009 Silverado go to Neil Arthur Bellamy, the entirety of the Bellamy Ridge property, 282 acres in Harlan County, including all structures and mineral rights, goes to Cora Jean Bellamy. Neil made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "Mineral rights? To what? There hasn't been coal on that ridge since before I was born. The seam played out in the 50s. The cabins half collapsed. The access road washed out 6 years ago. And the last time anybody set foot on that property, a black bear had moved into the old equipment shed." Cora looked at the deed. She hadn't looked at her brother once since they sat down. She was 36 years old, recently laid off when Fayette County consolidated its school districts and eliminated her position as a music teacher. She was 7 months behind on her car payment, 2 months behind on rent, and had been surviving primarily on the generosity of her friend Tammy and a concerning amount of peanut butter. She had moved back to Kentucky from Columbus 3 months ago with 2 suitcases and a cello she couldn't afford to have repaired. To Cora, 282 acres of anything sounded like breathing room. "Grandpa Emil knew what he was doing," she said quietly. Emil Bellamy had died in February at 89, in the same county where he'd been born. He had farmed the high ridge, run a small sawmill, and told long, wandering stories about his own grandfather, a German immigrant named Oscar who had come to Kentucky in 1931 to work the coal mines and stayed because he fell in love with the mountain itself. Emil was a sweet old man who didn't understand property values, Neil said flatly. "Cora, listen to me. There's a company that's been making offers on land in that basin for the past 1.5 years. They approached Dwight last week." Dwight produced a letter. The letterhead read Meridian Resource Group. The representative's name was Kathleen Durst. "They're offering $25,000, Dwight said. Cash, as is. No inspections required on your part." Neil leaned forward. "Take it. You're drowning. 25 grand pays your back rent, clears your car note, gives you 6 months to find another teaching job somewhere." "Why do they want it?" Cora said. Neil blinked. "What? Why does a resource company want 280 acres of played-out ridgeland with a collapsed cabin and a bear in the shed? They're not going to farm it. Coal's been gone for 70 years. Neil spread his hands. "Probably a tax write-off. Some kind of land banking scheme. It doesn't matter. Take the money." "I'm not selling," she said. She picked up the deed from Dwight's desk, folded it once, and tucked it into the inside pocket of her jacket. "I'll be in touch, Dwight. Thank you." She drove 4 hours south with the windows down. What she found when she turned off the state highway onto the old gravel track was worse than she'd imagined. The access road had washed out. She left her car at the bottom of the hollow and hiked the last 1.5 miles through second-growth timber, her sneakers soaked through within 10 minutes. The cabin her great-grandfather, Oscar, had built was standing, but only barely. The porch had collapsed inward. A tree had fallen across the back corner of the roof. Every window was gone. Cora stood in the clearing and looked up at the ridge line. The old mine entrance, long since caved in and sealed with a concrete cap, was barely visible through the undergrowth. The mountain rose above her, quiet and enormous, covered in hardwood and birdsong. She sat down on a mossy log and cried for a long time. She cried for Emile, whom she had not visited nearly enough in his last years. She cried for the teaching job and the career she'd spent 12 years building. She cried because she was 36 years old, and the most valuable thing she owned was a steep ridge that her brother had already written off as a losing hand. But when the crying finished, something settled in behind her ribs, a kind of bedrock stubbornness she recognized from Emile himself. She drove back to Harlan, found the cheapest motel with weekly rates, and got to work. Over the next 2 weeks, she cleared brush, patched the cabin roof with a tarp, and repaired the porch enough to sleep on. She got the generator running. She drove to the hardware store in town and bought a used chainsaw. She catalogued every structure on the property and began sorting through what Emile had left inside the cabin. That was when she found the journal. It was in a cedar box under the floorboards of the back bedroom, wrapped in oilcloth. Not Emile's handwriting. The script was older, more formal, in a hand that mixed English and German. The name on the inside cover was Oscar Heinrich Bellamy, 1947. She sat on the repaired porch in the evening light and read every page. Oscar had been many things in his life: a coal miner, a carpenter, a part-time distiller during Prohibition, but he had also, quietly and obsessively, taught himself geology from library books and correspondence courses. And in the summer of 1947, after the main coal seam had begun to play out, he had done something remarkable. He had kept digging, not in the coal seam but below it, following a geological hunch based on the color and composition of the clay layers beneath the carbon deposits. He had excavated a secondary shaft alone, in secret, mostly at night, and had penetrated approximately 40 feet below the base of the coal formation before his money and his body gave out. What he found he described in meticulous detail: a layer of pale blue-gray clay, almost luminous, interbedded with dark metallic nodules he couldn't identify from his reference books. He sent a sample to a professor at the University of Kentucky. The professor's reply, dated November 1947, was tucked inside the back cover. In formal academic language, it described the mineral composition as consistent with lithium-bearing pegmatite deposits. Rare in Kentucky, potentially significant in value, but impossible to quantify without survey equipment the professor didn't have. Oscar had read that letter. Then he had sealed the shaft, buried the journal, and never spoken of it again. The reason was on the last page, in careful block letters. The mountain men who strip mine do not leave mountains. They leave holes. This mountain stays. Cora was not a geologist. She didn't know what lithium deposits were worth in 1947, but she had a smartphone, and she knew exactly what lithium was worth now. In an age of electric vehicles and battery technology reshaping the global economy. She searched for 20 minutes, then put the phone face down on the porch railing and stared at the tree line. She called Dwight Harlan the next morning. She also called Dr. Reginald Cho, a geology professor at the University of Kentucky, whose name she found in a department listing online, and drove to Lexington with the journal and Oscar's original letter. Dr. Cho read both documents with the focused attention of someone who had stopped breathing. "If this deposit is what your great-grandfather described," he said carefully, "and if it has the lateral extent that the clay outcroppings along your ridge suggest." He stopped, started again. "Miss Bellamy, do you know why Meridian Resource Group has been buying land in Harlan County for the past 18 months? She did not. They commissioned an aerial magnetometric survey of the entire coal basin 2 years ago. They identified anomalous metallic signatures consistent with lithium-bearing formations. They've been quietly acquiring mineral rights across a 12-mile radius." He looked at her. "Yours is the last parcel they haven't been able to purchase." Everything went cold and very clear. Dr. Cho came to the ridge 3 days later with 2 graduate students and a field analyzer. They spent 6 hours on the property. Kathleen Durst called Cora's cell phone that same afternoon. I think we got off on the wrong foot, Kathleen said. Her voice was professionally warm, the kind of warmth that lived entirely on the surface. Our initial offer was conservative. We'd like to revise it substantially, $45,000. I'm busy right now, Cora said. I'll have my attorney call yours. Kathleen's warmth thinned almost imperceptibly. Of course, we'll look forward to that. The offers came faster after that. 60,000, then 85. Then, 3 days after Dr. Cho's preliminary field report confirmed the presence of a significant lithium-bearing clay deposit with an estimated surface area of over 30 acres, Meridian jumped to $120,000. Cora didn't call back. What she did instead was drive to Lexington and sit down with a mineral rights attorney named Curtis Abrams, who specialized in exactly the kind of situation she was standing in the middle of. Curtis was a compact, methodical man with reading glasses perpetually pushed to the top of his head and the particular calm of someone who had watched large companies try to bully small landowners for 30 years. "The mineral rights are yours," he said. "Your grandfather included them explicitly in the deed. Meridian knows that. The escalating offers tell me they've confirmed the deposit through their own survey data, and they need your ground to access the core formation. Without your parcel, their route to the deposit is essentially blocked. What's it worth?" Curtis took off his glasses and turned them over in his hands. He named a figure. Cora asked him to repeat it. She went back to the ridge and sat on the porch and watched the sun drop behind the tree line. She thought about Oscar, who had taught himself geology by lamplight because he loved a mountain enough to protect it. She thought about Emil, who had kept a secret for 80 years without spending a single dollar of what it might have been worth. She thought, the mountain keeps its promises. You just have to be patient enough to listen. The morning Meridian's courier arrived at the cabin with a certified envelope. Legal language about manufactured tax lien claims and county environmental ordinances Cora was allegedly violating. A transparent attempt to force a sale. She was already on the phone with Curtis. "I expected something like this," Curtis said. "The tax claims are fabricated. The environmental citations don't apply to undeveloped ridgeland. They're trying to scare you." A pause. "Are you scared?" Cora looked out at the ridge. "No, I'm angry. There's a difference." The next 6 months were the hardest of her life. Harder than the layoff, harder than the quiet divorce that had unraveled in Columbus 2 years before she came home. Meridian fought the property dispute on 3 legal fronts simultaneously. They hired a competing geologist to dispute the deposit's extent. They pressured the county assessor's office. They leaked a story to a regional business journal, suggesting the deposit was overvalued and that Cora was being manipulated by opportunistic lawyers. Curtis was unimpressed. He had seen worse. In the end, Meridian settled out of court rather than risk a public trial that would expose the details of their county-wide mineral rights acquisition strategy. Information Kentucky's Attorney General had by then begun expressing formal interest in. Cora signed the royalty agreement on a Wednesday afternoon in a Lexington conference room. A 15-year licensing arrangement with a substantial upfront payment and ton extraction royalties paid to the landowner, her, for as long as the deposit was actively mined. After Curtis's fees and applicable taxes, the upfront payment alone erased every debt she carried. The royalties were a different matter entirely. Those would keep coming. She had 2 conditions she wouldn't negotiate. The first, a conservation easement across 30% of the ridge, protecting the old-growth timber and the headwater streams. No equipment on those acres. Ever. The second, the cabin was to be restored. Not demolished, it was to remain standing. She drove back to Harlan on a Thursday in November. The sky was that particular deep blue that only comes to the mountains in late autumn. the hardwood stripped bare and the ridge line standing in hard relief against the fading light. She was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee when Neil's Range Rover came up the newly graded access road. He stepped out in his fleece vest and looked around at what the property had become. The cleared land, the rebuilt fence line, the restored cabin with its new cedar porch boards and repointed stone chimney. He looked like a man recalculating. "Cora," he said, walking up, "this place is really something. You really turned it around." He smiled. The same smile she'd grown up with, the one that always preceded an ask. "Listen, I know we didn't see eye to eye when Dwight read the will. I was under a lot of pressure at the time, and we're family, and honestly, I've got some bridge loans coming due. You told me to take $25,000, Cora said pleasantly. Sign the mineral rights away, and be grateful for the lifeline. I was trying to help you. You were trying to hurry me." She set her coffee cup on the railing. "Neil, Grandpa Emil left the land to me. The mineral rights is me. What's under this mountain belongs to the deed, and the deed was very clear about who holds the deed." She looked at him evenly. "You got the truck and the bank accounts. I got the ridge. We both got exactly what he decided we should have." Neil's jaw worked. "This is family money, Cora. You can't just—" "I spent 4 months in this cabin without running water, clearing brush with a chainsaw while you didn't return my calls." Her voice stayed level, which was harder than yelling would have been. "I earned every cent of what this mountain gave me. Just like Oscar earned it. Just like Emil earned it by staying quiet for 80 years when he could have sold." She stood and held the door open, not in invitation but in conclusion. "Drive safe," she said. "The lower section of the road gets slick when the temperature drops." Neil stood there a moment longer, then he walked back to his car. Cora let the door close behind her. She stood in the front room, the restored floorboard solid underfoot, and looked out through the new windows at the ridge. The old concrete mine cap was still visible through the undergrowth. She'd asked the survey team to leave it alone. Oscar's secret shaft was somewhere beneath it, 40 feet down in the blue clay, patient and quiet for as long as it needed to be. She had his journal open on the table. She ran her finger along the last line he had written, the careful block letters in his adopted language. "The mountain keeps its promises. You just have to be patient enough to listen." She was patient. She could listen. "So here's what we want to ask you before you go. If every person you trusted told you to walk away from the only thing you had left, would you hold on?" Cora held on. And the mountain answered, "Drop a comment below and what you would have done in her shoes. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and stick around. Because at Keep the Drama, we believe the things that look like burdens are sometimes the whole inheritance." We'll see you in the next one.